In the creative arts industry, the murder of a project is considered especially heinous. The dedicated detectives who investigate these vicious felonies are members of an elite squad known as the Pitch Bleak Unit. The cases are real. The victims are real. The season is almost over. This is Pitch Bleak. On today's episode, Dan Ilic, investigative humorist, a shadowy figure behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, and usually making a scene. A finger in every pie and a foot in every door. The count of content. This one-man media machine has never been afraid to court controversy in order to get the job done. So why couldn't this hitmaker turn his multi-award-winning podcast into a TV show? Who decided to ban Dan? It's time to catch a killer on the True Creative Crime podcast, Pitch Bleak.
Interview with suspects begins 6:45 p.m. Officers Hayden Bevis and Chris Kennett present.
Would you state your full name for the tape, please?
My name is Daniel Peter Ilic.
I'm going to stop you there, Daniel Peter, because there's been a lot of controversy about this. Ilic, not Ilic.
I'm not going to bring up the fact that you're being racist by calling me Ilic. I won't do that because I did it to everybody when I was starting out my showbiz career. I started out as an Ilic. And that is purely because I figured out that no one called Carlos Stefanovic would get a Logie. And so if Karl Stefanovic was going to be Karl Stefanovic, then I had to be Dan Ilic.
I can't fault the Stefanovic logic.
Well, needless to say, neither Dan Ilic or Daniel Ilic has received a Logie. So, maybe there's something else at play here.
You have described yourself as an investigative humorist. Explain.
Yeah, I kind of started out my career as a sketch comedian, but then kind of moved into satire halfway through Ruddy John. So I kind of thought that I would be less of a comedian and more of a journalist, or mixing journalism and comedy in a way that would be my shtick as a comedian. So a part journalist, part comedian, I call myself an investigative humorist.
Here's an oddball. I started following an account of Philip Bloom, a camera reviewer from the UK. Now, the only other person I saw following was one Dan Ilic. You're a gearhead, Dan, is that correct?
I love toys, and I will buy a toy if I think it will make up for my lack of talent. And that's exactly why I've got a beautiful studio here in my home filled with toys, because I'm not very talented.
So you like to get your hands dirty with production? Is that right? Like, do you like to get in and make your own stuff?
I love writing and I love performing, but I think I kind of got into production because I saw it as a means to an end. Like for me, it was like, if I get into production, then and I know the tools and I know how to edit, I can go ahead and make my own stuff, and that reduces all the barriers to making something. My first job in high school, or rather my second job, was working at a Nextbyte, which was an Apple computer reseller. And I purely got that job because I had once edited a video on like a Power PC, and I was so astonished with the power of editing. I was like, whoa, what I need is a Mac to edit on. And I kind of hit Apple products right at the time when the iMac came out. So I was kind of working at this Apple shop, and I was like borrowing gear and stealing RAM and upgrading all my gear through this Apple shop so I could edit videos and sketches and make comedy videos on my own terms. And like back then, that was a really big deal. Like now, everything is done on the phone. Everyone's got a phone. Everyone's making content on the toilet or wherever they are because they just do it on the phone. But far out, back in 1998, the gear was expensive. Like cameras are expensive. Editing gear was expensive. It was multiple thousands of dollars to kind of get into making content.
What do you think of the word content right now? Like, do you like the word content?
I think, you boys and I are of a similar age, and I feel like the word content is incredibly devalued, or devalues the process of making something. It's a complex kind of conversation to have around that word. I remember once I was on radio, I was on 702, and I was interviewing Tim Minchin, on air, and off air I was telling him about a new job I was getting in America at a digital website to do satire, to do kind of satirical comedy video making. And he looked at me and said, "Oh, cool, content." And I was like, "Oh, when you said content, Tim, that put a knife through my heart." I was like, fuck, Tim's right. I mean, Tim's always right.
Yeah.
It is content. And what is content? Oh, no. I've gone from being a comedian to a broadcaster to making content.
All this small talk, it's all very nice. We've got to butter you up a bit, but we're here to talk about your crimes. Well, crimes in general. They may be your crimes. But frankly, your rap sheet is long and terrifying. You've been on the Pitch Bleak radar for a long time, stretching right back to our very first case. Your name came up in the course of investigation when we were speaking about the Fresh Off the Boat mixtape that ended in nothing. Were you responsible? There was not enough evidence to say at that time.
I heard that episode. I heard it like the month it came out, and I was so perplexed. I don't remember having kind of any kind of serious conversations about it. I'm pretty sure no one sent me an email about it. I looked through my emails. I don't know why my name was thrusted. I would have been like 25 and had very little experience in television. Like,
tell it
who
to
would
the
trust
judge,
me
pal.
to show run their sketch comedy program on SBS?
Now, this has got to be one of the most amount of fingers in the most amount of pies we've ever had on Pitch Bleak. We've got Beaconsfield the musical, the Ronnie Johns Half-Hour, Hungry Beast. You directed The Mansion. You directed TV ads for Vic Roads. Is that right?
Arguably, that could be called content. Yes, I did content for Vic Roads.
You were executive producer on The Tonightly. You like in 2016, you covered the US election for content again. That's just a handful of things that you've done just in the that was early on in the pipeline. All of these credits and whatnot over a whole bunch of different formats. How are you deciding where to go next? And can you just sit still?
I think when you're younger, you've got a lot of energy and you're trying to prove yourself. And I think back in those days, back in the mid-2000s, I was really trying to figure out who I was as a comedian and a creator, and I just really wanted to have a crack at it. And anything that kind of piqued my interest, I just ran at as hard as possible. I went to the 2008 DNC to see Barack Obama accept the nomination. And that came about because I was an editor at Fairfax, and I got to know lots of kind of people in the Fairfax ecosystem. And I kind of pitched them this idea, and they said, yeah, and they found me a little bit of money. So I went over with a producer and made content for them there. And that was like an aha moment. It was like, oh, wow, you can make these things on such a small scale. Maybe I can kind of extend that out and try to make bigger things. So right now, I'm really trying to focus on making long-form things, big narrative things, and developing new series with other amazing talent in them. So I've kind of got an animation series in with Millie Holton. It's called Longhead. It's very, very funny that she's created. And I'm in development with a kind of big sort of narrative dramedy with a studio in Australia. So trying to get that up off the ground as well. So I kind of started off making small things and then kind of graduate to bigger and bigger things. And so now I'm at the point where I just need to make big things. Otherwise, I won't be able to pay off this mortgage.
So you're thinking rather than walking around with 10 pies on fingers, you're trying to shed some of the smaller pies and just two fists in like two massive pies.
One fuck off pie in my thumb. I just want to. I want to be spinning a pie on my thumb like a Harlem Globetrotter and saying, "Look at my big fucking pie."
You're not a stranger to controversy, Dan Ilic, and I want to take you back. We mentioned in passing a few minutes ago, Beaconsfield, the musical. This kind of got your name out there. Earned you some notoriety, I think it's fair to say.
Beaconsfield the musical. It was a musical about the Beaconsfield mine disaster that happened in Tasmania in 2006. So the reason I thought it was a good idea in the first place was because I came up with a pun title, which was Beaconsfield, a musical in A flat minor. And I think probably it was indefensible, but at the same time, I thought it was really funny, and I couldn't help but write it after I had come up with it. And so it was this weird thing where the pun drove the rest of the show. And essentially the show was about the media manipulation or the media exploitation of a tragedy. And for those who are old enough to remember, you'll see every television network down there kind of hitting the streets and exploiting people for their stories. And it was astonishing what was happening down there. At one point, you had the Sunrise program on Channel 7 holding like a music gala event to raise money for Beaconsfield at Beaconsfield outside the mine. And then the next day you had Channel 9 holding a big musical gala event to do the exact same thing. It was just this insane. It was like it was these networks sucking the life out of this small town. And I just thought it was interesting. And I wrote it in Beaconsfield. So I went to Beaconsfield, sat in the Exchange Hotel, and I interviewed miners and interviewed locals and kind of weaved some of their stories into it. So I kind of had a good feeling for just how this small town felt about the media kind of turning up to their doorstep and just like stealing all their stories and putting them on the national stage and really exploiting them. And so I thought, well, that seems to be a very successful thing the media does. Maybe I can do that, but one step removed by making fun of the media doing that. Hooray! We'd booked this space and we had a great cast. Toby Trustlove, Kate McLennan, Amanda Buckley, Nigel O'Brien, directed by Luke Joslin, who is now like a superstar musical director. It was like this crazy kind of superstar sort of mix of kind of comedy improvisers. We booked this 30-seater. I thought it would sell out really easily. But the thing is, it didn't sell out at all. In fact, we came to opening night and I think we had sold like 2 tickets. And I was sweating bullets because we'd written this great show. There were more people on stage than were in the audience. And I just had to figure out a way to get audience into this show. And I just thought, well, maybe if I let some of the press know in Tasmania that this show is happening, maybe someone from Tasmania might fly to Melbourne to watch this show. And, that would be great. Maybe 3 or 4 people would come and see the show from Tasmania on the off chance. So after like weeks of sending out press releases and emails to like street press and such like and media organisations, no one is biting. I emailed the editor of The Examiner, the Launceston Examiner, which is the nearest biggest town to Beaconsfield. And I said, hey, I'm doing this musical. Do you want to write about it? And within a few minutes, somebody called me back straight away. And they were savage. They asked me some very hard questions, and all I could think of was, well, the professional comedian in me would just respond with jokes. And so I was trying to be as facetious as possible. And this article was just me. And on paper, it looks terrible. Like it looks like this smartass has come in and like is making fun of this tragedy. But in my mind, in my 27-year-old brain, I thought this was the funniest thing I could possibly do. And so they ran the article. And what I didn't realize at the time was that it was a Fairfax paper. It was a Fairfax networked paper. And so the editor of The Age had seen the copy and lifted it up and put it on the front page of The Age. And I didn't know that until about 11 p.m. the night before, when I got a call from my friend Chris McDonald, who is a producer and a comedy agent, and we made Ronnie Johns together. And he called me up and said, g'day, Dan. Just letting you know, like, I was listening to Tony Delroy's What the Papers Say on 774, where they read tomorrow's news today, and you're on the front page of The Age tomorrow. And I was like, that's amazing. So I went to my website and took my personal details on my website and changed the details of my of my website to my agent at the time's details, and I gave her a call and said, "Oh, you might be busy tomorrow. You might field a few phone calls, just letting you know." This is like before Twitter. Like this is before anyone is reachable on social media. And so the next morning at like 5:30, I got the first phone call, and it was like Matt and Joe from Fox FM, and they were so excited about it. They're like, "Oh, what have you done here? This is amazing. Oh, tell us about it. Whoa, it's a musical. Ding, ding, ding. It's at the Fringe Festival. Go check out Beaconsfield, a musical in A-flat minor." And I hung up the phone and I thought, "Oh,
Great.
this is going to be a piece of cake. This is going to be great." The next phone call was Neil Mitchell, and he was like, "You're the worst person in the world." It was swings and roundabouts. It was extremely difficult. It turns out Matt and Joe were the only ones that were really excited about the musical, and everybody else wanted to rip me to shreds for it. I kept getting phone calls like from Current Affair and all the TV news, and because I'd worked in media a little bit, I'd worked in as a video journalist for Fairfax. I kind of knew how to handle it, like a press conference. So I said, "Well, I'm going to call a presser. It's going to be at 10 o'clock at the Butterfly Club. So come along, bring your cameras. We'll set up. We'll do a presser." And which I thought was incredible, like foresight for someone who was like 27 and just kind of didn't really know anything. But it was like, wow, you can actually control the media if you really want to. And I thought, this is really good fun. We went to the 10 o'clock presser and I was shit scared. I made a couple of the cast members stand next to me like a politician that was in trouble so they could do noddies behind me. And I just basically recited the same facetious jokes to every media organisation that turned up to the presser. People were saying, "Oh, what about, why'd you call it Beaconsfield a musical in A-flat minor?" And I would say dumb stuff like, "Well, because Beaconsfield the rock opera was too hard to make."
It also makes light of the death of Larry Knight, the miner killed in the collapse. His relatives are disgusted.
I imagine they would have taken offence to the title, however, which is Beaconsfield, a musical in A-flat minor, but the truth is we were going to call it a rock opera, but we could only afford a piano.
They'd come into the theatre and set up a row of cameras, and we chucked them all out because we hadn't actually rehearsed what we were going to do for them. So we had to quickly choreograph and put together a song so it looked like we had something to sell.
No one gives a in 2000 and
now it's satirical fodder for fringe comedy laughs.
It was chaos. It was like every media organisation in Australia wanted to tell me how bad I was for writing a musical about the media exploitation of a small town, which I thought was super ironic. And it really had a real strange effect on my mental health. I went a bit crazy because it was like 2 days of this. And everybody wanted to talk. You know, it was 60 Minutes and A Current Affair and Koshy and Mel, and everyone wanted to have a piece.
Your experience when you were going through that media firestorm, clearly what they wanted was for you to go through a shaming session and then to apologize, and you just steadfastly refused to do this at any point. And I just don't think they knew what to do with that. It's just like that. This is not. He's not following the rules. This is not the rules of engagement.
I think that's right. And I worked with a great guy called Rob Lang. Rob Lang was the producer of a young musical theatre show that I used to be part of in Sydney called the Cumberland Gang Show. It was a Scout and Guide theatre production. But he was also the CEO of like Pacific Power. Like he's a proper like CEO kind of guy. And he once kind of spoke to me about media manipulation. He's like, if you want to say something, you just have to know what you're going to say and say it over and over again. Like in the media, in his experience of media, he was kind of talking about, facing, scrutiny over shutting down Pacific Power or whatever company he was forced to shut down at the time. And he's like, so I just wrote a bunch of lines and I just kind of said what I wanted to say. And I remember that sitting in the back of my brain, and that's been kicking around my brain for about 6 years since he said it. And so I kind of was like, well, if I'm going to face the media, what I need to do is write a whole bunch of jokes down and have them ready to go. So I kind of took myself through like a workshop where I was like imagining the questions that were going to be asked, and then I would try to write facetious, hilarious responses to those questions and just make sure I would hit them back over and over again, because those would be the sound bites that they would use. And the moment I said something boring, they might use that. But what's the point of that? I'm trying to sell tickets here. I was put under so much stress because we only had a few days left before opening night. I just was kind of at the end of my tether. And the day before opening night, I got a phone call from James Carlton, who is the son of Mike Carlton, who was a 60 Minutes very celebrated journalist, very kind of famous Channel 9 personality. During Beaconsfield, during the disaster, while he was covering it, he had a cardiac arrest and died. And at the time, I read a book called Underground, I think it was about Beaconsfield, and it was about the animosity that so many of the journalists had towards Mike Carlton, because he managed to get the exclusive interview with the miners and their families through checkbook journalism. So it was this kind of interesting moment where all the journalists in Australia were ripping Mike Carlton apart. Then he died. Then all of a sudden, all the journalists in Australia had to celebrate Mike Carlton publicly. So I wrote this song called The Carlton Cardiac. And it was basically a 3-minute version of that. It was a classic hypocritical ode to media hypocrisy. So the day before opening night, James Carlton called me and he said, "Oh, g'day, Dan. It's James Carlton here. I'm Mike's son." I was like, "Oh, yes. Hi, James." And he said, I just want you to know that I'm not angry with you and that the family's not angry with you. And if Mike was around, he'd be pretty chuffed with what you're doing right now. So please don't think any of this outrage is real. This is all kind of confected outrage." And that was the best thing I could ever hear, because I had no idea what I had done, really. And it really put my mind at ease, and we opened to a full house, and we had a full house for the rest of the run. And then we took to Melbourne, and we took it to Melbourne Comedy Festival the year after, and we had a great 5-star reviews from The Age and stuff like that. Chris Kennett did a lovely cameo for Beaconsfield when we couldn't have either Kate McLennan or Toby Truslove. I can't remember.
I filled in for Toby Truslove for one show in the Melbourne season, and I think this something that seems to make absolutely no sense now, but it did happen, and I'm not ashamed of my dark past. On your side of things, and in fact,
Chris, I just thought, who could be as charming and as handsome and as funny as Toby Truslove? And I thought, I'll ask Chris Kennett. He might be up for it.
We're pretty much mirror images. And look, and the whole experience drove me to become the creative crime investigator that I am today.
Today we have to discuss a crime, a creative crime.
What?
It's an interesting conundrum, though, is you're here to talk about irrational fear. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's my little kind of satirical comedy show.
Is it still going? Is it still alive? Because we deal in cold cases, Dan. This feels like the opposite of a cold case.
I think the dream of it being on television is dead. Does that count?
I guess we need to know, what is irrational fear? Like, what is the story of it? How did it start for you?
Well, back in 2012, I just finished Hungry Beast, and I was kind of wanting to kind of continue on doing kind of satirical comedy stuff in a meaningful way. And 2012, there wasn't anything like The Daily Show on Australian TV. Not like in recent years where you all of a sudden have, Pickering show, you had McAuliffe show, you had Mark Humphreys, you got everybody trying to do satirical comedy all at once. Back in 2012, nothing was around, and it'd been a long time since anyone had done kind of jokes about the news, or really pointed jokes about the news, stuff with a real strong point of view. And I think that was kind of the dream of Irrational Fear. It would be like a real opinion piece, a real kind of place for comedians to come and express something about the world, in a way that was meaningful to them, and always kind of hold a little place for climate change, because back in 2012, no one was talking about climate change. We were about 100 parts per million less in carbon dioxide than we are today. So we kind of started off at a pub in King's Cross. We're doing a live show at a room called the FBI Social, which is connected to the FBI radio station. And I'd been a broadcaster at FBI for years. And so I kind of pitched in this idea that once a month we would do like a comedy Q&A style, like kind of radio broadcast from the FBI Social. And we had these great live shows that we would record and then turn it into a podcast. And it was a way to kind of practice kind of doing a satirical comedy show. And the feeling of doing these shows was often so good. It was like, wow, this should be a television show. This should be broadcast. So we just kept doing it. And we did it for 2-3 years. And then come about 2014, Foxtel had started to kind of circle us, and they started to come to our shows. Executives would come to our shows, and then we kind of looked around, we're like, well, this is kind of interesting. You know, maybe there's a way we can go bigger with this. So we booked a show at the Sydney Opera House, and we invited Foxtel to come, which they came, and they said it was a really great show.
Can I jump in there and just say, you just booked the Sydney Opera House? You said that like, you say it like I can just ring up now and just, oh, this could be bigger.
This is the thing. You can, like you would produce your Melbourne Comedy Festival show.
Yeah.
In fact, I think it's cheaper to do the Sydney Opera House than it is to do the Melbourne International Comedy Festival.
So this seems like a big, an insider industry secret, because people will do opera house shows and it always looks like, oh my God, you know, the opera house, they've made it. And it turns out just anybody can do it. You gave your 21st there.
That's it. You can have your 21st there. You can. Absolutely. We were kind of doing these live shows, recording as a podcast, broadcasting on FBI. And it had this great reputation in Sydney. Like, people would drive across the city once the show had started, because it was live broadcast. They would hear it on air, and you'd see the King's Cross Hotel slowly fill up with people standing at the back. We had this kind of fantastic vibe around it. And then Foxtel took us in for a meeting, and we had this meeting with Foxtel for the Comedy Channel, and they said, this is really great. Let's talk about it. And, you know, you do your opera house show and then come back to us and we'll have another pitch meeting. And so we did the opera house show, sold that session out, made some great sketches to go with it. It had a really great vibe. Because it was filmed as well, we kind of had this pilot that was recorded live on stage. So you got a feeling for what a TV show could look and feel like.
Yeah.
The live shows probably needs a little tweaking to kind of be a real proper TV offering. And then we had this meeting at Foxtel with Graham Burrell, who at the time was like one of the top executives at Foxtel. And I was so excited to have this meeting because I was thinking how, sure, if this show was on the Comedy Channel, it wouldn't get a lot of views, but the assets you would get from it far outweigh the views. So if I could hold on to the podcast and kind of the socials and things like that, and we would make a TV show for the Comedy Channel, they would get a great TV show. We would build buzz online. They would get the appearance of having an extraordinarily successful kind of comedy show. And this meeting was meant to be half an hour. And the meeting kind of went on for like an hour, and then it kind of got to like the 90-minute mark, and they were asking all these detailed questions about budgets and talent pipelines and structure and production companies, and I was in there with my agent at the time and my producer, and we had a great answer for everything, and we had a great sales pitch, and we had a great deck, we had great sketches, we'd just come off the Opera House, and we probably made some of the funniest stuff in the Irrational Fear oeuvre at the time that was in this keynote presentation. And this meeting seemed so positive because it hit 90 minutes, and I'm like, we were meant to be out of here an hour ago. Yeah. And then Graham Burrell turned to us and he put his feet on the table. And he said, look, I'll be honest with you. We've already spent our money for the next few years with Open Slather. But we really like this. And I was like, oh, what? what is Open Slather? Which I had learned it was a $35 million sketch comedy show.
Fuck, man.
That Rick McKenna made and spent $15 million making at almost $1 million an episode.
What?
And they didn't deliver a second season because it rated so badly. And it had all these great, iconic Australian sketch comedy comedians in who don't really want to do sketch comedy anymore, plus a whole bunch of really young, amazing talent who were kind of being suffocated by these old folks. And our budget was like $1.5 million for a season. It was like, how do you spend $35 million on a sketch comedy show? When Graham Barrell said he'd spent the money for the next couple of years for the Comedy Channel, I stopped talking and shut down and let my agent at the time continue the conversation while I was hyperventilating in the corner.
That is a cruel way, very cruel way to have your dream shot down.
It was the thing that made me so embarrassed that I actually found a job in America and I left to go to America. I was like Christopher Skase, but my ego was the debt.
What's happened since then?
Well, we stopped recording the podcast. Like it kind of went into this long, deep freeze for years. And I don't think it really came back until about 2019. And that's kind of when momentum started to pick up again. So 2020 was a really good year for us. Lewis and I decided to go every week, turning up to FBI studios to record it. But then, of course, COVID happened. And then we all had to, like we all do now, record podcasts from home. And that was kind of a really interesting, critical moment for us, because all of a sudden that set the podcast free in terms of where we can record and how we can record. And all of a sudden we could get any guest we wanted. And we were doing kind of great numbers with great guests and all over Zoom, which was revolutionary at the time in 2020. And so it kind of picked up steam from then. And then 2021, 2022, 2023, 2020, we picked up those awards for Best Comedy Podcast because we were just hitting it every week. We were just doing it over and over and over. And that was really satisfactory to just kind of have something to do, mainly during lockdown. So that became our little hobby that kind of kept us sane, and at the same time, entertaining people and giving comedians a go. And thankfully, around 2020, I'd kind of won a fellowship, and so that had paid for the podcast, and I could pay comics to come on the podcast. So I could give everyone $100 to come on, which was unheard of. Like, to be able to pay comedians to come do your podcast is crazy. Like, you don't even get paid to do the ABC. You barely get paid to do commercial media.
I want to point out it's still unheard of for Pitch Bleak.
No one does it.
You will not be receiving $100.
But it's so good. It's so fun to be able to, like, PayPal someone $100 after they've done the show. And that was the privilege at the time of being on this fellowship and being able to, say, well, because we talk a little bit about climate, they gave us some money, and so we can kind of, facilitate this conversation in this way.
To turn it into a TV show, how were you going to manipulate the format to make it work?
About the same time, around 2014, a great format of the UK came out, which was the perfect format to kind of slot Irrational Fear into. It was 10 o'clock live. You may remember it. It had Charlie Brooker on it and Jimmy Carr and a bunch of other comedians. And it was a really smart, interesting way to hold interesting, satirical conversations, great analysis, be really funny, but really be really smart. And I feel like a lot of kind of satirical comedy in Australia misses the mark in that respect. Like, there's plenty of time to have fun, but there's kind of few moments where you can actually kind of bring some analysis to stuff in a way that's funny and smart. And so that was kind of the aim. And having kind of built Irrational Fear, which was kind of sketch, monologue, discussion, interview, we could kind of pull all those elements together and mush it into this format that kind of looked and smelt like a TV format that already existed, which was at the time 10 o'clock live. So that was the vibe. By the very nature of me hosting it, that's a problem because I'm not famous enough I once went into a 9 pitch meeting for Irrational Fear before the Foxtel meeting, and I kind of said, look, here's all the success we've had. How about it? And they said, look, to be honest, Dan, we would barely even get this up if Will Anderson hosted. Like, if you want someone to host this, you need like Dave Chappelle to host this. And I was like, "Are you serious?" He's like, "Yeah, that's the only way a satirical comedy show is going to get up on our network is if a big America star or a big kind of comedy star import was going to host this."
Why is it? Why can't this sort of show that you're talking about, whether it was Irrational Fear or something in the similar vein, why can't that happen in Australia? Why hasn't it happened, really?
I don't know. I don't know the answer. And it's so funny. At the moment, I have one of my gigs is mentoring young content creators who work at the national broadcaster. And one of them sent me a lovely clip from The Late Show, which was kind of everything. The Late Show for me was like this iconic show that all I ever wanted to do growing up was create similar shows like The Late Show, the D-Gen Late Show on the ABC. And she sent me this clip. She must be 25 herself right now in 2024. She said, "Hey, Dan, how can we bring back some of the 90s pizzazz that they used to have on the ABC? Look at this great clip from The Late Show." And all I could think of was writing this email return, but which I didn't write, but in my head was like, look, if I could tell you how the ABC could make something great like The Late Show, like I've been trying to make for 2 decades or recreate for 2 decades on the ABC, how to kind of create a live comedy vehicle with young people who've got something to say, who could create a platform that's funny and irreverent and builds a community around it, then it would have been done. There's something, I mean, we can do it. We can make it. We make a podcast. We sell out the Sydney Opera House, like the problem's not on our end. The problem is on the network's end. The average mean age at the ABC in 2024 is 70. Like it is, that is like, it's a 70-year-old white person. That's the person you have to kind of create your TV show for. And that's kind of why everything on the ABC has that certain smell.
Even though everything's like, oh, it's content and TikTok now and stuff, is there still an allure for you where you're like, I want to get it on telly?
Hayden, I'm a 42-year-old man who grew up on TV, and all I want is my little show on TV. It's this weird ingrained thing, and I know in the deepest of my hearts that it's wrong and TV is irrelevant and no one watches TV. I know that TV is like is the Titanic, right? I know that these broadcast networks that we grew up watching no longer get the audience that they once did. Like the simple matter of fact is that in 2024, that there's a great stat from Unmade, which is a great email newsletter from Tim Burrows, who used to run Mumbrella. He said that 70% of people under the age of 40 in 2024 did not interact with a broadcast network brand in any space. So be that digital, television, or otherwise.
There it is.
And that's me too. That's me too. Like I have a big fucking TV on my wall. It's not actually connected to an aerial. It's connected to all the apps. Like there's actually no broadcast network going into that TV.
So if we literally go, Dan, here's all of the cameras and all of the production gear, and we will do Irrational Fear for a whole series, it just won't end up on the ABC. It would be on YouTube. You would be like, it's just not the same.
Absolutely not. No, I would, like right now, I would jump at that. Like that's like the aim. Yeah. I think the viewership on YouTube is insane, and I think trying to make something that is engaging for that audience is the challenge right now. But if you asked me that 15 years ago, I'd probably laugh at your face.
Have you pursued again the avenue of trying to get a network on board to try to make it a TV show, or where did that end up?
Most recently, I took it into SBS because I heard because somebody, a TV producer, called me up and asked me if I had any capacity to come and work on development for a pitch to SBS about artificial intelligence. The new, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, let me look at my diary. And I didn't look at my diary. Instead, I took out an Irrational Fear deck and I turned it into big episodes about big ideas. So one of them was artificial intelligence, and one of them was about climate change. I kind of took that into the network for a meeting, and I was like, hey, I know you're looking for something about artificial intelligence, but here's what I've got for you. And they said, do you man, look, you're a great host, Dan, you're great talent, but do you think Adam Liao and Mark Fennell could host it? And I said, no, I don't know if they can. No, they didn't say that. But that was a swift no from them about a week after. But I think it was a compelling offering. They should have taken it. So I'm unsure about whether I want to do that anymore, like whether that's appealing anymore to me. Like, yeah, I had the great privilege of show running Tonightly when I came back from America, and that was really hard and really intense, mainly because we were operating 4 nights a week at the ABC, pumping out the show every single day. We had a couple of people come through the country who worked at The Daily Show and SNL, and these guys were just my friends from America, and they came in to kind of talk with the team. And they're like, so how many weeks have you guys been on? And they're like, oh, we've been operating for 24 weeks now. I'm like, oh my God. Apparently, like, SNL does 7 weeks on, 7 weeks off. So they can have a rest. And they do 1 show a week. And then The Daily Show, which does 4 shows a week, does like a run of 3 weeks, has a week off, and then a run of 3 weeks. And like, we've been going for 24 weeks straight. And like, we're all burnt out as fuck. And these Americans are like, I cannot believe you are operating at this level and you're producing what you're producing right now, because you guys should be dead.
Nobody could believe that. I still cannot believe the production schedule of Tonightly. It's like, it's actually the polar opposite of Open Slather in terms of...
There was a phrase that bandied about Hungry Beast when we worked there. And the phrase that Andrew Denton would always tell us was, well, it's the privilege of working on the national broadcaster. And that phrase would paper over a lot of things, be it long work hours or underpay, or everything we would do would be for the privilege of working on the national broadcaster.
So are we going to declare it dead, or the idea of Irrational Fear? Are we going to put a bullet in its head now, or like?
I honestly think it's dead for television. Like, this is a show called Pitch Bleak. This is about pitching things to television. I think this show is dead for TV. I think it's done. For the sake of this podcast, if they said they would want it, if Channel 9 said, hey, can we have Irrational Fear? I'll say no. Because I did this podcast called Pitch Bleak.
Thank you. Thank you.
It would really ruin the narrative continuity. Could we call it something else?
Finally, someone who gets it.
Can we call it A Current Fear? That would be good. That would be good for us.
Now it is time to actually find out who killed Irrational Fear. We're going to point fingers and figure out who is the person to blame for the death of Irrational Fear, the TV show. There is a lot of slander that's about to happen.
Yep.
So we're going to point names. You can jump in at any point and say yes or no to any of these, but we will come up with who we've decided is the killer of Irrational Fear.
This is through a process of exhaustive investigation, also known as just writing down names that you said while you were speaking. I think suspicion's got to fall pretty heavily on the shoulders of Karl Stefanovic, or Stefanovic. Stefanovic, thank you very much. There's a lot of questions floating around the culpability of this Next Bite store that you once worked for, and possibly seems that you may have stolen quite a lot of stuff from them while you were working there.
Like, it was a bit more of a long-term borrowing program. If you think of it more like more of an arts grant kind of situation.
Your involvement with the Fresh Off the Boat crew, as well documented in one of our previous cases, I think we've got to look at a revenge scenario there.
I cannot even remember that.
Exactly. You can't even remember. You don't remember them. You're denying all knowledge.
Oh my God.
Neil Mitchell has had it in for you.
He's started a podcast now. I don't know if you've seen him. He's on Twitter these days and he's putting clips up of his podcast. And it's kind of unedifying. You know, there's a certain amount of ego that gets wrapped up in when you're a shock jock, right? Because you're a shock jock. You've got this inbuilt audience. You have this power. You've got the ear of the premier. Let's get him on the line. And then you retire and you go start a podcast, which is a massive step down. And you're still publishing videos of yourself asking tough questions in a similar vein. And you actually don't have to do that anymore, Neil. Like, Neil, you actually can retire. Just relax, Neil. Go and read a book, Neil. Like, go to the golf. Go, like, travel the world, Neil. Step away from the microphone. You just don't have to do it. You don't have to be chained. Your opinions don't have to be broadcast to everyone. Neil, you're no longer a shock jock. You're now an 80-year-old guy ranting into the internet, just like everybody else is. You've got all the money in the world, Neil Mitchell. Just stop it. You don't have to do it anymore. You don't have to do it anymore.
We've got Graham Burrell at Foxtel Comedy Channel who drops the bombshell on you that, no, there's no money.
Someone at Foxtel, maybe above him, spent the money like without anybody knowing. I'm pretty sure that's what happened. Like, I'm pretty sure someone dropped 35 million and created Open Slather without telling anybody. And then all of a sudden, nobody can make anything else. Like, this is what's happened.
So do we know how much, how soon beforehand that had happened? Like, it was like the day before, had Michael Veitch just gone into the office and they've gone, 35 million to you, sir.
Everyone else at Foxtel in the room was blindsided, like, because all the network who were rooting for us, who wanted to see the show get up, they'd been courting us for weeks to get it up to Graham Burrell. So they found out in the room that they also had no money to make anything. So imagine all of their projects that they'd been cooking, thinking, this will be a great TV show. This will be great for this channel. This will be great for that channel. All of those projects vanished.
What was the noise like? Like when he said the words?
Was there a hiss, sort of like as of air coming out of a balloon?
That was the noise coming out of me. I shut down. I just fell into this comatose daze. And then Andrew Garrick, the producer, started talking on my behalf. And then Liz Adams, my agent, started talking on my behalf. And I just like disappeared from the meeting. But I was physically there, but my mind was elsewhere. It was pretty extraordinary.
Would you watch a version of the show now, a rerun, but if it had a tally of the money spent as the sketches were going?
They should have done that.
Well, when we were doing Ronnie Johns, we thought that would be a great sketch because we're like, we need to spend $150,000 an episode for Ronnie Johns. Like, how do we, what would be funny would be to do a tally like that and just kind of burn money on the screen with telling people how much we're spending. I've spent thousands on 3 seconds of like thousands for a prop for like a 3-second joke. On Hungry Beast, we wrote a joke about the Winter Olympics in Sochi not having any snow. And so we got a bobsled sent from Melbourne to Sydney to put on a grass hill that we would pretend to slide down, like a real Olympic bobsled. And we had to get a real one because we thought that would be funniest. And that cost like $6,000 for like 30 seconds, for 4 seconds worth of joke. I'm not innocent of spending frivolous amounts of money to make comedy.
You are not innocent, Dan Ilic, because the last name on this list is your own. I think you've got to face the fact that you may be culpable by virtue of not being Dave Chappelle. Why weren't you Dave Chappelle? Why do you continue not to be Dave Chappelle? And I think you've got to look at that as to the very strong reason as to why Irrational Fear has not become the TV network hit that you dream.
I feel like you've cracked the case.
That's it.
When you go back and look at all the pitches I've done, if I said, and we've got Dave Chappelle on board,
Yeah.
All of those no's would have been a yes. Channel 9 would have been a yes. You know, Channel 10 would have been a yes. I've never taken it to 7, which is ironic because we could do some real good defamation stuff.
This is your thing. You're the center of it. As you've sort of explicitly said, I don't think you can just slot somebody else in to host this instead of me. Is it the fact that you are that you're not a big enough star personally? Is that it?
I honestly think that's it. But because the podcast is great, it wins a lot of awards. We've got more awards than any other kind of comedy podcast in Australia because of it. We tour around the country. We did a show in the Torres Strait for The Voice recently, which is like last year, which is amazing.
Wow.
And we do like amazing things. Like we put billboards in New York City to make fun of the government. Like that's really fun. That's really fun, big kind of impactful stuff that if you were on a TV show, you know, that would be an amazing moment that would win a Logie. But it's like, it's so strange to kind of have this great engagement with an audience online, but to have a whole bunch of gatekeepers not see the potential of what could be if they gave it a home. To not find a champion within a network to kind of foster the idea, the platform, the space for new talent. And I'm not new talent anymore, but the show itself always has a space for new talent. I did joke when I went into SBS about Adam Liao and Mark Fennell, and they did suggest that they did ask the question. They did say, do you think somebody else could host this? And I did say, well, if Adam Liao is not busy, I'm sure he'd be great at it. And they had a big laugh at that because he's on everything at the network. And often when you've got a new platform, you often need to attach the network personality to it to host it. Otherwise it won't get up because there's already a bunch of money that's already exists for them.
Could you be a gatekeeper, Dan? Could you see yourself gatekeeping?
It'd be great fun. I'd love to say no. I'd love to invite people in and go, you know, it's such a great idea, Dan, but we've just spent $40 million on the Chris Kennett Half-Hour, and
it's worth every cent.
There are a few people that are really good at it, and they give you immediate feedback, and they give you immediate constructive criticism, and there's a radical candor to them, and it makes life so much easier. So the ABC is really terrible at it because they give you bad feedback. But Network 10 is a really good example. Like Yeesam Lowe at Network 10 is such a great development executive. She'll immediately go, that's a great pitch. We've got this and this. That's a problem there. You've got this problem here. You've got this problem here. Come back with this, and then let's talk about it again.
I think we've come to the end, Dan, and I think we're pointing the finger. Have you decided who you've pointed the finger at of all those names?
I mean, I'd love to point the finger right directly at Mr. Ilic, if that is his real name. not being Dave Chappelle, not having but by his own admission, the star power, the cachet, the to pull a reluctant gatekeeper across the line.
I'll take it. I think you're right.
I'm afraid that means that we must remand you to custody.
Sorry.
Can I make one phone call? Is that possible?
Yes.
Oh yeah, yeah. No 0055 numbers though, please.
Do you have the number for Dave Chappelle?
Do you think if I had Dave Chappelle's number, we'd be talking to you? Come on. Well, Bevis, this is it. I've got 1 day left till retirement.
Oh, really?
I always have 1 day left until retirement, but then I sort of keep rolling it over. It keeps me fresh, you know? Then I've always got that 1 day left to retirement attitude to every case.
Is that a good attitude?
No, it takes an awful toll on me.
Are you going somewhere else after this, or are you...
Well, what I'm expecting is that, of course, on one of these 1 day left till retirements, that I will, of course, be killed by my nemesis.
The scientist from Year 9.
Yeah. Leaving you motivated to take vengeance on my part and bring them to justice. This hasn't happened yet, which is why I keep extending the deadline.
Have you, in a glimpse of my character over these 2 seasons, thought that vengeance would be something I would be into?
I'm hoping that you're going to work up to it.
Okay.
But it will be when you're standing over my corpse, that you will find within you the rage will well up.
Okay. Is that what you want me to do? Is this your plan?
I'm generally in favour of rage.
Speaking of rage,
Yeah.
I've got a cracking idea for a board game.
Board game. It's new.
Do you know Family Feud?
The board game or the TV
show, but you know, it has a
I
version.
know.
that's
Yeah,
board game.
I know. There's a board game.
The concept is pretty much Family Feud,
Okay.
except it's stereotypical Family Feud. So maybe take Family Feud off.
Yeah.
But instead of going, we asked 100 people, you get to choose your categories of people in which they asked. So it's like we asked 100, you used to choose. We asked 100 42-year-old men or 100 grandmothers or 100 3-year-olds
Yeah.
or 100 people from Mudgee.
Yeah.
And you've now got to be like, and then the questions would be like, where's the best place to go on a first date? And then you
Right.
would guess it, but you'd think of it on behalf of that group of people.
How racial is it going to get?
Well, this is my problem that I've got to figure out. Like, I don't think that should enter it whatsoever, but I'm worried. I'm worried it might just because of the nature of the internet.
Okay. I think we avoid any charges of racism by just making sure everybody involved is white.
Okay. Well, I didn't.
No?
I didn't.
Well, you know, maybe you shouldn't have got so racist to start out
I mean,
with.
God, is it just because I've laid the platform for racism?
Yeah, I think you said something about stereotypes.
Oh, okay. But you know what I mean. It's yeah, but that's the board game, and it's like
I forgot it's a board game. It's
it's a
not
board
TV
game.
show.
It's not a TV show.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I misapprehended that one.
Well, I opened
That's a bit-
with this is a board game.
You did.
I've got a cracking idea for a board game.
Yeah.
But then I started thinking about the show.
Mate.
With it's all white people. I mean, we can't restrict sales to just particular races of people. There's no practical way to do that.
I don't want to like.
No.
This is a
I
game
know.
board game for everyone. Chris, what are you?
It's just become very problematic.
You took it down that path very quickly. Okay, so it's like, all right, well, it was 100. We asked 100 mechanics.
100 mechanics.
Yeah.
What?
What's the best
What-
shirt to wear on a Saturday?
Yeah.
And the top answer is polo. And then
Okay.
you're like, okay, cool. You know what I mean? Questions like that. They're not always like, why do they have to be like, you have to turn it into some racist thing?
Well, I mean, mechanics are often racist. They can be. Anyone could be. They come from all walks of life. You're being very closed-minded about this.
I'd like to scrap that idea.